student grant program, for student volunteers. Vashi, over to you on that.
Yeah, I think the questions for the Prime Minister since that revelation that both his mother and brother were paid by the We Charity or through organizations associated with the We Charity is certainly going to be at the forefront of what he's asked about today. I think in particular you highlight something that presents the optics of a conflict of interest. I'm not talking in legal terms here or in specific terms, but certainly the optics of a conflict of interest. For weeks, we were led to believe that there was no money exchanged, that nobody was profiting from this organization in any way, and therefore the Prime Minister's office and the Prime Minister himself contended that he didn't have to recuse himself when Cabinet ultimately signed off, that in fact the program being administered by We wasn't a problem in the first place. And obviously things have changed since those assertions were first made. We now know them not to be true. And so I think, there are many technical questions. The Conservatives are asking for a police investigation. They're asking for an emergency ethics committee. They're asking for the Prime Minister himself to appear before the Finance Committee as it investigates all of this. Certainly those questions are there, but I think primarily for most Canadians, this is a question of why didn't you recuse yourself? Why do you get how this appears to be a conflict, and why didn't anyone in your office or yourself or surrounding you say, hey, this isn't right, this isn't going to look right, and this is the way Canadians are going to perceive it, particularly in light of the fact that the Prime Minister has had troubles with ethics investigations and in fact rulings from the Ethics Commissioner in the past over that very idea of conflict of interest. I think there are a lot of facts that are still remaining to be found. We don't know for sure of any sort of connection where, especially where the certain aspects of the Conflict of Interest Act are concerned, whether they were breached. The Ethics Commissioner is still doing that investigation. But from a political standpoint, if you're talking strategy, if you're talking optics, if you're talking just right and wrong, I think genuinely there are a lot of questions for the Prime Minister about why it just why didn't this not pass the sniff test right off the bat?
So a couple things to remind people that the Ethics Commissioner, in fact, had agreed to look into this even before the revelations that his family was paid any money, and it's not small sums of money. We should also point out it was $250,000 for Margaret Trudeau to speak on 28 occasions with this organization, $32,000 for the Prime Minister's brother, Alexandre. The Prime Minister's office says that the Prime Minister himself has never been paid for any of these events. His wife, Sophie Gregoire Trudeau, did receive, I believe it was $1,400 before he became Prime Minister. And now that this money component has been added to the issues that were already there for some people, David, it certainly complicates things for the Prime Minister, and that's why there'll be so many questions for him today.
Controversy grew from the Trudeau government giving a contract to a charity that is close to Trudeau and his wife, to the Trudeau government giving a contract to a charity that is giving money to other members of the Trudeau family. Now, the money is moving through different parts of the We corporate structure, but it's all to appear at events connected with the charity. So really, while there are divisions within the corporate structure, to the community at large, and in practical application, it's a distinction really without a difference in a lot of ways. And we're going to hear from the Prime Minister, and unfortunately for the Prime Minister, he does not get the last word on this, right? Because there are two, maybe as many as three parliamentary committees that are going to be digging into this, as well as the Ethics Commissioner. And unlike with the SNC-Lavalin affair, Rosie, the Liberals are in a minority now. They don't have the most seats on the committee. So while Francis Drouin could be called up out of the bullpen to go in and shut down a Justice Committee hearing last March because they didn't want to have a discussion about calling Jody Wilson-Raybould, for example, to testify, they have no capacity to do that. So welcome to minority government. You are at the mercy of the majority, and the majority happens to be a coalition of Conservatives, the Bloc, the NDP, and the Greens. So while they've been able to find allies on the delivery of government programs, they are unlikely to find allies on conversations about waiving cabinet confidence and releasing cabinet documents that would help the public understand it. And in the absence of full disclosure of documents and conversations in the decision-making process, Canadians are asked simply to take the Prime Minister's word for it and the Finance Minister's word for it that what they did was right. And we also have We's word for it today. Big full-page newspaper ads running out outlining 3 or 4 different things, 3 of them really central to the controversy the Prime Minister will speak about. One, that This was recommended by the public sector. That has been corroborated by senior members of the public service, though the paper trail on that decision has not been made public. Two, that the contract, people keep talking about $1 billion contract. It was actually like a $20 million contract, almost $1 billion program. But WE makes the point that the $20 million or $19.5 million they were going to receive was not profit. It was simply cost recovery. So they would have become the vehicle through which this money would have flowed, and they would have gotten back the money that would have cost to operate this, and there was no gravy in it, so to speak, for the charity. And the third is that when they ended the contract, they took a bit of a hit and didn't ask for the money back. So they actually probably lost some money because of the controversy here. Now, there's a whole separate thing with WE that has to do with the conduct of the charity, the way it has handled itself, the fact that it has paid people like Margaret Trudeau and Sacha Trudeau and not other people, predominantly people of color who have come forward, or not predominantly, but a lot of people of color have come forward saying, we weren't paid, we were told it was volunteer. They say that, look, we have made some mistakes, we regret some of these things. Our whole operation has been dragged into the spotlight in this whole thing, and we are committed to making reforms and fixing some of our own internal problems. And they also promise to have more to say. Now, I don't know if that means Craig or Mark Kielberger is going to sit down and do an interview with you or Vashi or somebody else to explain themselves. They've turned us down almost as much as Bardish Chagger, the minister responsible for all of this, has over the past week. But there are still a lot of questions to be answered on this about the judgment here to not recuse yourself if you're the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister when you have clear family connections to this charity, who have clear financial connections to this charity.
I should point out as well that over the weekend, the Toronto Star reported that, and we confirmed, but the Toronto Star reported the number that WE was forced to lay off hundreds of contract workers that it had hired to help administer this program. 450, I believe, is the number that the Toronto Star reported. So there was a direct impact on the charity's ability to keep some employees, some contract workers anyway, on staff to administer what, as you point out, was going to be a vast program to try and help students do some volunteer hours, recruit them, and get an honorarium for that work, up to $5,000. That program is still trying to be reconstituted, or they're trying to figure out how to administer it using government employees. There are 35,000 or something students that signed up for it, and the government says that they're trying to figure out now how they can do that work, but they do maintain that it was the public sector that said, listen, WE Charity knows how to do this. They do these kinds of things. We think they can do it pretty easily. What became the issue for people, maybe not following it as closely as we are, is, first of all, the Prime Minister's close relationship with the organization. And then again, as we pointed out, these contracts that his mother and brother had to speak at these different events as well. Vashi, the Prime Minister, we haven't actually heard from him in a while. It's been a while since he's done one of these updates outside of his home. I imagine he'll have things to say about the pandemic. We also know that he's expecting to speak with President Donald Trump this morning, so maybe there'll be something to come out of that conversation. And I'm sure there'll be other questions, or there'll be other things he will want to update on the pandemic. But this will, I think, be the primary source of questions at any rate today, Vashi.
Yeah, I think that's a safe bet to be sure, Rosie. And I think something David flagged and that you just built on is really important as well going forward. The Prime Minister and other cabinet ministers have long maintained that this wasn't something initiated by cabinet or initiated by the Prime Minister's office, that it was the bureaucracy. And I don't know about you, but I've heard from a lot of public servants who aren't happy, feel a little bit thrown under the bus with all this. But the bureaucracy who initially said, as you pointed out, hey, this is the best bet to get this program done. This is the only, this is why it's sole source. This is the only organization that can really accomplish what we want to accomplish with this program. I think part of one of the NDP's motions, which I believe passed before the Finance Committee, was to get all those documents and enter them into the committee at least, or make them public. And that is sort of one of the key pieces to this puzzle. I know David did a lot of reporting on it last week as well, that has yet to be really transparent, right? And in the vacuum of that, as David says, we're sort of left to just be expected to trust their word on it. I think if they were to at least present something publicly that corroborated that removed, I guess, all of the sort of questions around, I don't know if it'll remove them, but sort of at least tempered some of the questions around how much political involvement there was in this decision. Decision making is so different during the pandemic, and normally this would go through the Treasury Board, for example, or there might be a committee that looks at it, or a certain department. determine, it seems it's very difficult to get any kind of straight answers right now about how exactly this decision was made and what level of involvement the Prime Minister himself had at the outset or people in his office, because I think that's where a lot of the conflict questions come from. I mean, there's still the overarching thing. Didn't anyone see that because they had this long history with the organization, it would look suspect?
All right, Vashti, I'm going to leave it there. Here's the Prime Minister, and I'll come back to you. Thank you.
Issues to discuss, including the Canada Student Grant Service. But first, I want to give you an idea of what's coming up this week. It is our intention to extend the wage subsidy into December, and we are also continuing our discussions with the provinces and territories on the safe reopening of the economy. I have also spoken to President Trump this morning, and we talked about the new NAFTA, we talked about tariffs on aluminum, and we talked about systemic racism, and of course we also talked about China and the 2 Canadians arbitrarily detained there.
You've seen me come out to talk with Canadians about what we're doing to help you and your family, your employer, your local businesses deal with this pandemic. We're going to continue to do that vital work. This week, we'll be announcing an extension to the wage subsidy program until December to give greater certainty and support to businesses as we restart the economy. We've also been working very hard, the Deputy Prime Minister Freeland and I, on the Safe Restart program with the provinces, and we will have an update on that later this week. This morning, I spoke with President Trump about the new NAFTA, about aluminum tariffs, about Black Lives Matter, and also about the issue of China and the 2 detained Canadians. This morning, I know people want to hear more about the Canada Student Service Grant Program in particular. I know there are many questions and problems with the way this program is run about, and I know people have concerns about it. I get that. I made a mistake in not recusing myself immediately from the discussions, given our family's history. And I'm sincerely sorry about not having done that. I got into politics to help people shape their country for the better. I've been youth critic and youth minister for our government. And every step of the way, I've tried to create opportunities for young people to serve. During this unprecedented pandemic, we got very creative with a range of programs designed to help Canadians, to help families, to help businesses, and yes, to help young people. We worked with a range of partners across the country, organizations from United Way to the Red Cross to food banks. We made sure that we got help to Canadians. But when it came to this organization and this program, the involvement that I'd had in the past and that my family has should have had me remove myself from those discussions. And I'm sorry that I didn't. I'm particularly sorry because not only has it created unnecessary controversy and issues, it also means that young people who are facing a difficult time right now, getting summer jobs, contributing to their communities, are going to have to wait a little longer before getting those opportunities to serve. And that's frustrating. We
introduced a program to help students get involved in their communities, but because of my participation in the organization, I should have recused myself from the discussions, which I did not. All we wanted to do was help young people. Throughout my career in politics, I've tried to create opportunities for young people. I was very, very interested in what this program could deliver for them, but because of my family connections to the organization, I should not have been part of the discussion. That was a mistake on my part, and I want to express my apologies for that. But this is very frustrating because there are young people who could now be serving their communities through this program, and they will have to wait a little longer because of a mistake that I made. In this pandemic, we have tried to do new things, to be creative, and certainly we were bound to make mistakes, and we adjusted a number of times as the situation evolved. But in this case, it's my fault. I should not have been involved in these discussions, and I want to express my deep apologies for that. We will continue to try and help Canadians right across the country through various programs, including helping young people. The WE organization has paid back the money that was provided to it and will be providing some placements, and we will be finding another organization to introduce these placements. Now, things did not roll out as we wanted it to, and I'm really disappointed in myself as a result.
We will continue to work very hard to deliver programs and services to Canadians who need support right across the country, including to young people who want nothing more than to be able to help out. Because of a mistake I made in not withdrawing from these conversations when the Public Service recommended we move forward with the WE organization, it has gotten a little slower for young people who are facing a difficult time right now to be able to get involved in their communities and make a difference. But I know young people across this country will continue to step up and serve in their communities, and we as a government will continue to work forward on delivering good programs for Canadians. From the beginning, we knew we had to move in unprecedented creative ways, work with a range of partners, and we have. In this situation, the mistake that we made was on me, and I take responsibility for it. We will continue to work very, very hard to deliver the programs that young people, indeed all Canadians, need to get through this historic pandemic. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Je suis maintenant content de prendre
I'm
vos
now
questions.
happy to take
Merci
your
beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier
questions.
ministre. On va commencer la conférence de presse aujourd'hui par le téléphone. Opérateur, c'est à vous.
Thank you. Merci. First question, Kate Bolongaro, Bloomberg. Line open.
Hello, Prime Minister. I have a question regarding the WE charity. You're facing your third ethics investigation in several years, and given the life expectancy of a minority government in Canada, do you think voters will forgive you whenever Canadians go back to the polls?
I think it's really important that governments do the best they can to serve Canadians, and in this situation, I should have recused myself. I think Canadians will make their judgments about what we were trying to do and what I should have done instead of staying involved in these conversations. But at the same time, we're going to keep focusing on delivering for Canadians so we can get through this pandemic and come back with a stronger economy, while at the same time we make sure that vulnerable Canadians and young people have greater opportunities than they had before.
Following up, Kate.
You spoke with President Trump today, and I'm wondering if you could give us more details regarding whether there will be tariffs on Canadian aluminum in the coming next few weeks.
I highlighted to the President that the pandemic has disrupted usual manufacturing processes and supply chains, and that has caused for certain disruption in the aluminum sector that is starting to realign itself given the economies are starting up again and manufacturing is getting going. I impressed upon him that it would be a shame to see tariffs come in between our two countries at a time where we're celebrating NAFTA and at a time where we want our businesses and our manufacturers to get going as quickly as possible, and we pledge to keep working on it together. J'ai souligné au président à quel
I pointed
point
out to the President that it's extremely important to reopen our two economies, and the fact that there has been this disruption as a result of COVID-19 has led to issues in our aluminum industry in North America, but things are now realigning with the reopening of our economies across the continent, and I said I hope we will not see any tariffs imposed that would only slow down the economic recovery that is very important for both our countries.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Raymond Filion, TVA. À vous.
Merci. Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier ministre.
Good morning, Prime
Au moment
Minister.
d'approuver le contrat d'organisme
Now,
WE, est-ce que vous étiez
when
au
you
courant que
approved
votre
the
mère et votre frère avaient été
contract to
rémunérés
WE,
des dizaines de
were
milliers
you
de dollars
aware
par
that tens of thousands of dollars had been paid to your mother and your brother? I knew that members of my family had worked with that organization. They had been involved in it, but I did not have any details on what they'd been paid, and I should have had those details, and I regret that.
I was very aware that members of my family have worked with and contributed to the WE organization, but I was unaware of the details of their remuneration, and I should have, and I regret that.
En suivi, Raymond.
Est-ce que quelqu'un au sein de l'appareil gouvernemental,
Can you say that there was someone in cabinet or in your organization that raised concerns about giving the contract to we? Well, there was some reflection carried out by myself and others in terms of the fact that the connections with the family meant that we had to be careful and made sure we did things right. But it was actually the public service that made that independent recommendation, and that reassured us. But as we see now, I should have gone further. I should have completely withdrawn from that discussion to allow students right across the country to benefit from those opportunities that now will come later.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, David Youngren, Reuters. Line open.
Yeah, good morning, Prime Minister. You spoke to President Trump. Can you let us know what your latest thinking is on when the border might be opened?
We recognize that the situation continues to be complex in the United States in regards to COVID-19. Every month we have been able to extend the border closures to all but essential goods and services, and those discussions are ongoing with the United States right now as we are a week from the next deadline for closures. We're going to continue to work hard to keep Canadians safe and to keep our economies flowing. We will have more to say later this week, I'm sure. Okay.
We recognize that it's important to ensure the protection of Canadians, while at the same time allowing them to travel and allowing essential goods and services to cross the borders. We're a week away from the end of the current ban on traveling, and we will have announcements to make in the coming days with respect to the border.
And secondly, given the complete calamity down south, how much are you possibly thinking about extending the closures, let's say, to the end of the year as opposed to this continual month-over-month movement?
We've pledged to continue to monitor closely the situation that is constantly evolving. We will be discussing with our American partners what the next steps should be, and I think this is a situation that is evolving rapidly, and therefore we need to keep responding to the situation on the ground. We will
continue to respond to the situation as it now exists. I think making long-term predictions is probably not the best idea, but we will do everything we have to do over the short and medium term to ensure that Canadians are safe.
Last question on the phone.
Thank you. Merci. Mélanie Marquis, La Presse. À vous.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. Just to clarify, you said that you were not aware of the details of what your family members had been paid. So does that mean you didn't know whether they'd been paid, or you did know that they'd been paid but not how much? Well, for a number of years now, members of my family, particularly my mother, have worked as speakers at various events and do that for various organizations where they talk about such issues as mental health. And I knew that she had a source of income from various organizations, but I didn't know exactly what she was paid by one or another organization. And I deeply regret that my mother has been involved in this situation because I made the mistake of not recusing myself from the discussion right from the beginning because of my family connections.
I have known, obviously, for many years that my mom has been an extraordinary advocate for mental health issues, a professional public speaker who works with a range of different organizations. Obviously, I knew she worked with We. I didn't know the details of how much she was getting paid by various organizations, but I should have, and I deeply regret that. What I also deeply regret is the fact that I have brought my mother into this situation in a way that is really unfair to her. I should have been thoughtful enough to recuse myself completely from any discussions around We because of these connections from the very beginning, and I did not, and I'm very sorry about that.
Merci. En suivi, Mélanie?
Follow-up?
Oui, c'est pas encore tout à fait clair pour moi.
Well, it's not totally clear for me
We
yet.
Charity en particulier avait
You
rémunéré
said
votre
that
mère,
We Charity
votre
did
épouse,
pay
mais
your
je vais quand
mother
même
for
passer à ma
speaking
question
engagements,
suivie.
but
Monsieur Blanchet,
François
vous a
Blanchet,
demandé la semaine dernière
asked
de
you
vous
last
retirer
week
et de céder
to
votre place
step
à Madame
down
Freeland,
and
parce que
allow
là,
Ms.
il
Freeland to
estime que,
take over
une fois
because
une
he
enquête
believes
commissaire ça va,
that
deux fois, là, vous
one
êtes rendu à
ethics
votre
inquiry
troisième
once, a
enquête,
second
la
one
troisième,
maybe,
donc
but now we're at your
Qu'est-ce que
third
vous lui
ethics
répondez à Monsieur
inquiry.
Blanchet?
What do you say to Mr. Blanchet? I believe the opposition parties have their job to do, and they will continue to do their job. But I also have a job, and my job is to deliver programs to Canadians and work with my cabinet, including the Deputy Prime Minister, and ensure that Canada can get through this pandemic and get the economy back on track as quickly as possible. And that's what I'll continue to do.
Okay. Obviously, the opposition parties have their job to do, and they will keep doing it. I have my job to do as well, which is to make sure that Canadians are well supported through this pandemic, and we have an economic restart that goes smoothly. I will continue to work with an outstanding group of ministers, including the Deputy Prime Minister. We will make sure we stay focused on delivering for Canadians.
Hi, Prime Minister. Crystal Logue with Global News. You just said that you weren't aware of the specific details of your family's involvement with We, but did you know that your mother and brother were paid by them, period?
I knew that my brother and my mother work as professional public speakers, and it is not surprising to me that they got paid by We. But I did not know the details, and as I said, I should have known the details, and I regret that. Comme j'ai dit,
As I said, my brother and my mother have worked as professional public speakers, and I know that they worked with various organizations, including the We Charity. However, I did not know exactly what they'd been paid by those organizations, and I should have known, and I regret that.
I just want to clarify what you're actually saying. Is it correct that you're saying that you knew they were being paid, but not how much? Is that the distinction you're making?
I knew that they were working as professional public speakers and worked for a range of organizations, including We. It is not a surprise to me that they got paid by We, but I didn't know how much they got paid by We. But I should have, and I regret that. Je savais que mon frère et ma mère
I knew that my brother and my father were working as professional public speakers, but I did not know how much they had been paid by the We Charity, and I regret that. I should have known.
Will you be accepting the Conservatives' invitation that you testify at Finance Committee?
We have a number of ministers and officials testifying this week to answer questions at committee, and I will look at any invitations that come in and discuss them with my House leadership team. Okay. Je sais que la ministre de la Jeunesse
et
d'autres personnes vont être
and other individuals will be there to testify at the committee this week, and we will be looking at the invitations and make the decisions accordingly.
CBC News. People are wondering also about the size of the grant to We, $900 million. You have 35,000 applications, and it doesn't seem, even if those people take the maximum amount available, that you would come anywhere near to $900 million. So can you explain that number and how many people you were expecting to assist through this program?
First of all, the amount in the contract to We was about $20 million for delivery of tens of thousands of youth placements across the country. They are the ones that have the network that was able to do that quickly. That was the recommendation by the Professional Public Service. As to the larger contract, which includes direct payments to young people for contributions for volunteering across this country, we're going to work with other organizations, perhaps even with Service Canada, as a way of delivering those grants for summer volunteerism. But that is obviously something that we're going to continue to work out with the public service now. Okay. Par rapport au contrat avec
With
Oui,
respect to the contract with We, there was $20 million to administer the program that was provided to them that they have repaid, and they will still be delivering many, many placements free of charge for the government. With respect to the direct payments to students for their volunteerism, that money will now have to go through other means, perhaps directly through Service Canada, which will be more complicated, but right now we're trying to ensure that young people will be able to serve and help out in their communities. And that has always been a priority for myself, and we will continue to do that. Radio-Canada, Mr. Trudeau, you were blamed twice by the Ethics Commissioner for conflict of interest. Are you familiar with the Conflict of Interest Act? Well, I realize that this is a situation where I should have recused myself right off the bat because of the involvement of my family. I did not do that. This is an issue, and this is an area where I've been working throughout my political career, getting involved with young people, helping young people, getting them opportunities. I did all of that with Cathy Mavik before I went into politics. This is something that has always been very important to me, and I did not remove myself from the discussions for that reason, but I should have, and I regret that.
I've been involved in youth organizations, youth volunteering, youth service since well before I was in politics and throughout my time in politics. It is something I believe deeply in, and should even given all that, I should not have stayed involved in the conversations because of the organization involved, because of the links to We that are there with my family and myself in the past. I regret this because something that I care deeply about, getting young people opportunities to serve, has become more difficult because of a mistake I made. But we're going to work very, very hard to ensure that these young people continue to get opportunities to serve.
Évidemment, on ne lâchera pas le morceau. On va continuer à en parler.
We will continue to talk about that. Now, is there anything else that we should know now with respect to this issue before you have to apologize a second time? Well, I'm being very clear with you. I should not have been involved in those discussions when the public service came forward with the recommendation to deal with this charity. Because of my family connections to the organization, I should have withdrawn from those discussions. I did not, and I regret that. It was a mistake that I made, and I will take the consequences.
Hi, Prime Minister Molly Thomas, CTV National News. You are making a massive U-turn today by saying sorry, after a week of defending your decision on We. How can you convince Canadians that this is a genuine apology and not just saying sorry because you got your hand stuck in the cookie jar?
I am sorry because young people who should be out there volunteering, contributing to their communities through this program will now have to wait a little longer. I've worked very hard through this pandemic, but also through my career to create opportunities for young people. And we've put forward many programs for young people, whether it's the increase in the Canada Summer Jobs, whether it's creation of new jobs in pandemic-related areas, whether it's investments in youth through the Canada Emergency Student Response Benefit. We are there to help young people, and it is really frustrating for me that because I made a mistake on this and I didn't step back from this decision when it came forward from the public service, young people are going to have to wait a little longer to be able to serve their country. I am frustrated by that. I deeply regret it, and I take responsibility for it. Okay.
I think that what frustrates me the most about this is that young people should have and could have had opportunities to serve their communities now right across the country through this program, and they won't be able to do that quite so quickly because I made the mistake of not withdrawing from the discussion right from the beginning because of my family connections. So it's frustrating for me, but we will continue to try and help those young people as we helped with the student response benefit and more summer jobs, and with various programs and the creation of jobs in sectors that need help throughout the pandemic. So we will continue to be there for young people, but this is a mistake that has made things more difficult, and I take responsibility for it and apologize.
This is the third time you've had a conflict of interest as Prime Minister. How many will it take for you to actually learn the lesson?
think we're going to continue to work very, very hard to deliver programs for Canadians. From the very beginning, the intention on this program was to get young people serving their country in a different way, in a creative way, in a way that we had to move quickly on because of the pandemic. We always knew from the beginning that there were going to need to be adjustments and tweaks to various programs, and we demonstrated throughout the past months that we have adjusted and tweaked and fixed errors, and you put programs aside that weren't quite working and improved other programs that were working well. These are the things that Canadians expect us to do. But on this one, this was my mistake. This was me not stepping back from an organization that I should have known to not get involved with, even as Prime Minister, and allow the public service and the non-connected ministers to move forward on delivering this program. The fact that I didn't made it more difficult for young people at a time where things are difficult enough already, and that is something I deeply regret.
Merci beaucoup. C'est ce qui m'a fait la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui.
Merci tout le monde.
All right, that is the Prime Minister of Canada on this Monday, doing something that he probably had to do, which was take questions, a variety of questions from reporters about the We charity controversy that has consumed the government for the better part of a week and a half. And the Prime Minister speaking without notes today, offering an apology and taking full responsibility for not recusing himself from the cabinet table when they had to sign off on giving We charity this student contract. Let's bring in Vashi Kapelis and David Cochrane there. I mean, I guess this is a very different approach, I would say, than we have seen the Prime Minister do in past mistakes. The Aga Khan comes to mind, that trip to the Aga Khan's private island for a Christmas holiday. I am not sure that it unfolded in this way, that there was an apology and an admission that he had made a mistake, Vashi.
Yeah, very much different. Even when you compare it to SNC, right away those allegations were called false by the Prime Minister. Obviously a different set of allegations. And even when the Ethics Commissioner came out with his report, which did conclude that the Prime Minister breached the Conflict of Interest Act, he insisted that he didn't fully agree with it. In this instance, I guess there's two ways to look at it. It's a lot earlier than the past two ethics controversies to come out and apologize, but it's also been a good number of weeks before this all broke, or at least a week and a half. And I remember now to last Wednesday when the Prime Minister was asked very specifically, did you recuse yourself? No, and if not, why not? And the Prime Minister just went on to talk about the importance of the program and the importance of helping out youth. So this is a distinct departure from what he and other ministers and members of the government have been saying in the past week and a half about their involvement in this. A couple of things that I guess I want to highlight out of those remarks. So the Prime Minister was specific in his apology as it related to not recusing himself. So we know, according to the government, that the public service is the one that put forth this idea that We was the right organization to handle this student volunteer program, which students get compensated for the number of hours they volunteer up until the end of October. The Prime Minister said today he should not have been a part of those discussions at all. He said it often, he said it many times, that he regrets not recusing himself right at the outset of that. He was also asked a number of follow-up questions, though, pertaining to what we had talked about in advance of his remarks, and that is the idea that his mother and brother were paid, as you pointed out, Rosie, especially in his mother's case, quite a bit of money over the period, by We, over the period in which he's been in office as Prime Minister. I think it was, $250,000 in his mother's case. And whether he knew that while he was involved in those discussions and while he was involved in cabinet signing off on this decision, which, as the government insists, was put forth by the public service. He was asked multiple times because at first his answer wasn't entirely clear. He wasn't aware of the details of remuneration. He wasn't aware of the details of what they were paid, but he did eventually say, I knew my mom and my brother are professional speakers, that they're paid by organizations. It's not surprising to him that they would have been paid by We, but what I garnered from it was that he didn't know the exact amount. So I think that, that obviously will, I'm sure, beg more questions for people who have questions about this incident, about if you had the gut feeling or if you kind of knew or weren't surprised that they were being paid, why didn't you make those inquiries at the outset before awarding what is a $20 million contract, but for a $900 million, nearly billion-dollar program, a program that, according to the Prime Minister's own comments, is of utmost importance, not only to the government, but personally to him as well. And he seemed to really put his apology in that context, right? So I'm really sorry I didn't recuse myself because of the effects that this has had on those students who are struggling right now and who wanted to avail themselves and benefit from this program. Obviously, it's going to be a lot more difficult and challenging for that to happen in light of what he did.
Yeah, and you're quite right that he didn't know the details of how much people had been paid, but he says, I should have known. I should have asked those questions, which I think is sort of going to be the problem going forward, David, because as he was also asked, this is a third investigation into issues around ethics and conflict of interest. And the third time that something pops up, you're into your second mandate. Why are you not asking those questions? I guess would have been my follow-up to him. Like, why, like, what? How are you going to get to the place where you're going to ask those questions and feel okay making decisions or recusing yourself from this?
Well, you know, Rosie, there's no teacher quite like experience, and unfortunately for the Prime Minister, he has a fair bit of experience in dealing with questions about ethical controversies. So from a public relations point of view, I think coming out today on the steps of Rideau Cottage and swallowing himself whole, saying, I did this. This was a mistake. I should have known better. I didn't do better. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to my mom. I'm sorry to we, and I'm sorry to all the Canadians who are now going to have to wait a long time or a longer time to get the student grant programs that they were counting on, and making a big unconditional apology. That's good. I mean, that means he's learned the experience from SNC-Lavalin, which was very different, but the controversies are so different. That was far more complicated, and you had to understand the distinct roles of the Justice Minister and the Attorney General and how the Shawcross Doctrine applied. This is, we gave money to a charity that gave money to my mom. People get that, and people can get mad at that, and there's really not a lot of gray area in that, despite what various partisans on Twitter might tell you. So I think what's interesting there is that he sort of said we didn't do the wrong thing, we just did it in the wrong way.
That's right.
That, you know, giving this to we, picking we on the advice of the civil service was the right thing to do. I just made a screw up as Prime Minister by not recusing myself and not asking the questions. And so that's where your point on the failure to learn from the past experiences is a problem for them. Because as we were going through this last week, and the statements that he made that Vashi talked about, where he asked the question, answered the question of, did you recuse yourself? And he said no, and he explained why. That was Wednesday. It was Thursday that the story of the financial payments to the family members came out. So the answer on Wednesday obviously couldn't hold going into Wednesday, and so we have this today. But when Cabinet dealt with this, it was either they did know about the financial relationship and they didn't care, or they didn't know and they should have known. And neither one of those is really a good explanation, which brings us to today with the Prime Minister saying, this is my fault, I should have asked these questions, I should have recused myself. We don't yet know if the Finance Minister is going to issue a statement along those lines, given the fact that one of his daughters is a direct employee of WE, and his other daughter has appeared at various WE events. So there's still a little bit to be decided, but look, the Ethics Commissioner hasn't done his work, and the Prime Minister has already raised his hand and said, this was a mistake, I am sorry, I apologize. Lost in this is big news. The wage subsidy is going to be extended until December. While a lot of us in Ottawa and political class is talking about the WE controversy, businesses and Canadians who are trying to get back to work, that really matters to them. We don't know the specific details, but there was $50 billion in the fiscal update last week to pay for this. And we know that they're looking at fixing the fiscal cliff, where if a business makes more than 30% of its previous year revenue, it loses the wage subsidy. They're going to massage that to make it more effective and to make it extend. Like, this is a very important piece of public policy. We should get the details on later this week, most likely from the Finance Minister. But in terms of damage control on WE, Rosie, that's about as good as the Prime Minister could do today, I think, because he just acknowledged he made a big mistake and he's really sorry.
Yeah, you're quite right to bring up the wage subsidy. I'm glad you raised it. It is important. I was talking to people just yesterday on Cross Country Checkup who were very concerned, employers, about sort of knowing the future in terms of their own financial stability. So being able to say to employers, because there hasn't been a huge amount of uptake, 580,000, close to 600,000 applications approved right now, that will be really reassuring for many employers to know that that possibility of that program will go now until December. So that is hugely significant for people suffering from the pandemic. And I would also just say on the apology, there was really nothing else to do at this point. Nope. You know what I mean? I don't know that denying it or saying it didn't matter or trying to play it down would have worked. The only thing for the Prime Minister to do here was to acknowledge it, apologize, take responsibility for it, and I think his hope would be now to move on. Unfortunately, as you mentioned earlier, for him, there are other parts of this that are being controlled by the opposition parties, who we saw yesterday with Pierre Poilievre don't intend to let this go very easily, want him to be a witness in front of committees, something the Prime Minister was asked as well, but didn't obviously commit to doing. The Ethics Commissioner will also look into the details of this and will probably want to interview the Prime Minister and other members of his staff around some of this as well. So this is sort of the public part of this that had to be done to explain to Canadians what went wrong in the Prime Minister's mind, but there will be other pieces of this that will move forward behind the scenes in parliamentary work and otherwise to see if there are other parts that need to emerge and how this all unfolded. One last thought from both of you, Vashi and David, I guess in terms of what would happen next or what you would be looking for in the days ahead on this.
Well, I certainly agree with you. I don't think that the opposition is all of a sudden going to say, okay, that apology was good for me. We're ready to go on. And you know, a certain part of that is understandable, because I think what you highlighted, Rosie, what your follow-up would have been there is actually pretty central to all of this from a political perspective, at least, or why questions will continue. You know, the Prime Minister says he's sorry that he didn't ask about whether or not his mom or brother had been paid, or didn't ask about those details, and didn't recuse himself right at the outset of this. But that question as to why, I think, has yet to be answered. And I think it's that question that's actually at the root of a great vulnerability for the Prime Minister and for this government around ethical issues. Why didn't you know or have an instinct, or why weren't people around you saying it's probably not a good idea to go to that island? Or maybe this will be, pressuring or, allegedly pressuring the Justice Minister will be perceived a certain way. Why didn't you, at the outset of this, think, I've been involved with this organization for so long, awarding this multi-million-dollar contract and nearly billion-dollar program is something that I should know more about, I should ask more about, I should really not want to appear as though there is a conflict of interest. And I think that those answers have never really been, at least in this instance, not yet provided, and they in turn provide fuel for those who say ethical lapses are a major vulnerability for the Prime Minister and for this government, and before those, until those questions are answered, I think that that kind of vulnerability will persist for them. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the sole mistake that the Prime Minister has admitted to here. It's a pattern of what you did, what you learned, and how you move forward that becomes part of the narrative that certainly the opposition will help to try and construct over time around the Prime Minister's own credibility and judgment. David, your last thought.
Yeah, Rosie, it's not just the Prime Minister, right? I mean, this is supposed to be government by cabinet, and Bardish Chagger is the minister responsible for this particular program. And when that proposal comes to cabinet, even though I know the normal processes are not being followed because a lot of this is under special rules to deal with the pandemic, there's a lot of people in government paid to be issues managers and senior advisors. And did Chagger's department or her political staff raise with cabinet that this was a potential issue, and did the cabinet ministers all know? I mean, when I was filling in for Vashi on Friday, we had Pablo Rodriguez, the House Leader on Power and Politics, and he wouldn't answer anything because he was sort of not hiding behind. He was rightly adhering to his duties under cabinet confidentiality. But now there's the question of, will you waive all of that? I mean, Pierre Poilievre is not going to say, well, he said, I'm sorry, it's okay. They're going to keep pressing this. They're going to demand full waivers of cabinet confidence. They're going to want documents. They're going to want testimony. And they're going to want the Ethics Commissioner to be allowed to do a fulsome and complete investigation. And in the absence of that, the apology may satisfy a lot of it. There are still these other painting in the corners of the picture that people will still want to see done. And the other thing he said today too, Rosie, that's news that we should look forward to, is maybe some progress on the Safe Restart Agreement. This is the $14 billion that they've put on the table, the federal government has, for the provinces to help restart, buy PPE, expand childcare, do these sorts of things. Another very meaningful public policy issue that governments are dealing with in the middle of this pandemic we should not lose sight of. So news coming this week on the wage subsidy and Safe Restart. overshadowed today by the We apology, but looking ahead, these are going to be significant things we're going to be talking about later in the week.
Okay. And you two will be talking about it much more through the course of the day. Sure. David, of course, will be on the National later, and Vashi will have lots more coverage, I expect, on this on Power and Politics at 5 Eastern. Thank you both for being here. Appreciate it, as always. Vashi Kapelis and David Cochrane. And with that, I will turn things back to my colleague, Michael Serapio, who will continue our coverage here on CBC News Network. Michael, thanks.
Rosemary Barton in Ottawa. Rosie, thank you. Now, for those of you who are just joining us, we just heard the Prime Minister now admitting that he mishandled the awarding of a government contract to the We charity. He apologized for not stepping aside from the decision. Justin Trudeau admitting he knew his mother and brother earned money speaking at events, but he says he did not know that they had received almost $300,000 in fees from the We charity.
When it came to this organization and this program,